would say it's safe to say that Arcade Fire is one of the most celebrated bands of the 2000s and have now surpassed the 2000s, living on to the 2020s with albums that are still successful for them today. They have a Grammy under their belt. They might even have other Grammys under their belt too. I'm not entirely sure of how many they have, but I know for a fact that The Suburbs did win Album of the Year, which is a pretty big one to win for a band that, you know, you wouldn't necessarily expect to win that award usually when it's up against some stiff and tough competition in the mainstream. And while my younger self did love this band and that album particularly a lot more than I do today, I still see the qualities in Arcade Fire's music. I still think their debut is easily their best work. I still think some of the tracks from The Suburbs are fantastic, and even the title track from Reflector is fantastic as well. One of my favourite Arcade Fire songs to date, and going to be pretty difficult to top, especially considering their 2017 album was that was a rough one. That was a rough one. Oh wow. Everything from the bloody vocals that they would bring together that just sounded a lot worse than they did before for some reason, particularly the shriekiness and the shrillness of them, and paired with the lyrical ideas across the album that were just so plainly and just so pandering, you know what I mean? I've said this before, but it's so hard to have an album critiquing society and critiquing the way things are going in the technological era without it sounding like pure awful shite. Why can't we get an album to do that? Even that Steven Wilson album from whatever year it was it last year or the year before? Man, there's just no way to do it. And Arcade Fire didn't do it well, apart from the title track, which I still think is a pretty nice little jam. But We is meant to be the comeback for them, because I think they acknowledge and recognise that the fans were not a fan of that album, the previous album. I think they know that. And what I hate about albums like this is that you can always tell and sense when an artist knows that their last album wasn't too good, because they try and patch up things. They try and correct the wrongdoings of the previous one. And then what happens is they try, and the album that they try and do that with ends up being still not very good. I always feel so bad for bands that do this, man. But here we are with We. They tried, but no, it's still not good. I'd say it starts pretty well. It starts off okay. Age of Living brings out that classic, you know, orchestral feel to the chamber pop days of their music. It's very earthly. It's very swelling. It's very, you know, dramatic. It's got something to it. And then the transition into that second half, which feels like a completely new song, feels like the Reflector days of Arcade Fire, you know, that kind of like 80s dance twist that they tried going for on that album, and again worked quite well on some of the tracks. So there's qualities here on this song particularly that I'm like, okay, yeah, I think this is a solid start. While we're on the positives, Lightning Part 2. I think there's a sharpness to this one. It springs into action from the previous track, kind of seamlessly out of nowhere, like it kind of builds into it. And it's just a pummeling, energetic, you know, the piano chords, you know the Arcade Fire way they do it when the piano's like, and then the vocals like, it's good, it sounds good. It's bringing again back what they tend to do well. And it's this kind of fired up indie rock style that not many other bands tend to sound like when they're fired up. There's a bit more of a grit to them, but Arcade Fire always had a bit of a finesse to the way they fired things up, and it works. But a lot of the rest of the album I just don't really care for that much, to be honest. The track Rabbit Hole I thought was really long, to be honest, and also the repetition of the hook with the rabbit hole thing. I just feel like they're starting to sound a bit dated with their hooks. Like they aren't really sticking to the times. This sounds like a really old song, and that's not to say old music is bad, but they just have a really like old school approach to their hooks, and I just think this track doesn't really pop out in any way. They're just kind of running behind things. Pairing that with the fact that bloody End of the Empire 1 to 3 sounds like some John Lennon shit with the piano chords, man. Like, Jesus Christ, this feels so stale and so... I hate to overuse the word generic, but it does. It sounds like something from 1968 or 1972. And you've just heard these piano chords on every bloody advert ever and every bloody X Factor audition ever. Like, I don't know, man. I just find like the lack of creativity here so uninspiring. Part 4 isn't that much better either, although at least musically it doesn't sound as bloody cliche as that track. But this time around, they're kind of entering some of those lyrical isms that they did on the last album with the idea of unsubscribing from life. Again, just using that kind of lingo makes it feel like it should work, but when you hear it said out loud, it actually just doesn't sound very good at all. Lookout Kid is unforgivable though. Oh my God. The cheesy, bloody ding 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 the folky instrumental. Oh my God. The Vampire Weekend-esque vocals. And then the fucking do-do-do, do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Ah, when that comes in, I'm like, oh no, no, no. This, for me, man, is like just so cringe-inducing hearing their do-do-do. They're going to be in my earbuds. They're going to be lodged in my brain for fucking ever now. I'm never going to not hear that. Oh, and every time I play this album as a purpose for the review, because I wasn't playing it out of enjoyment, obviously, as you can tell by my general thoughts on this album. But every time I played it for this review, I got to this track and those guitar chords came in, they came plucking through, and my balls shriveled up. They shriveled, I tell you right now. They shriveled like they never have before. Even a cold day couldn't shrivel them as much as this song. Race and Religion, again, feels like they're tapping into some lyrical idea that's grander than they can actually execute, because I have no idea what saying "I'll be your race and religion" even means. I wanted to kind of read the lyrics further and get to understand the song, but I just couldn't be bothered. I just was like hearing them say that and I was like, what is that? What is that? What does that mean? I just don't get it. What? We is just very general sounding, particularly again with the lyrics and the sound of the song. Kind of reminds me of something like Bob Dylan would try and do, except Bob Dylan would have a bit more of a unique angle to it than this. You know, when this all ends, we can do it again. Lines like that just don't really land too well, to be honest. And yeah, it just feels like the overall sentiment of the song is meant to make me feel something, and I don't feel anything when this track is on, which is really weird. So yeah, overall, lots of negative things, but also a lot of meh, to be honest. Like, for all the negatives I'm bringing out here, you know, don't forget that the main issue with the album, or the main problem with the album, is Lookout Kid. Let's not forget that. That is the one problem child of the album, the accidental child of the album. Everything else is just kind of just there. Like, the album's just there. It plays, it runs through. There's some good moments, like the opening track, good track, and then of course Lightning 2 I also enjoy. But everything else is just there. Like, it's just kind of just going through the motions. They've not really stepped up their sound, to be honest. It's a step up from the last album, which is pretty easy to do because the last album was that bad. But overall, like, I wouldn't necessarily say this is an improvement by many measures. Like, it's just a passable album. If anything, they're proving that even though they are so far into their career and they are still pretty successful as a band, they actually don't have that many more ideas to bring to the table. Like, they really don't. I'm struggling to see where's next for them. Are they just going to drop another album that sounds like this, that's becoming dated, that's even becoming cliche with how the lyrics sound and the music sounds at times as well? I'm just kind of wondering what's next for this band, because the more they drop music, the more they're actually ratioing themselves with the albums. Like, the good albums there's not that many of them compared to how many albums they have now. Like, they're really ratioing themselves Yeah, I don't know what to say. They're just kind of not really impressing me that much anymore. It's a 5 out of 10. It's a 5 out of 10. And since The Suburbs, I don't think they've dropped a particularly good album, to be quite frank. Reflector had the highlights, the standouts, but wasn't a great album overall. The one after, and then this one. Let me know your thoughts on this album here. Thank you for watching this review. As always, do subscribe if you haven't already. Would love to see that. Do check out my Patreon as well if you'd love to be part of the Discord server that we've got going on now. You can join it if you support me on Patreon for just the $1 a month. Thank you as always for watching. Have a good day. Tell me your thoughts in the comments, and goodbye.